This is the first video lecture for homework for Statistics 252. In these videos, I'm going to go over the homework. Some of the problems will be the same. Some of them will be similar, perhaps fewer numbers, so that I can show it on one slide. And I'll just try to give you an idea of how to do the homework. I have written lectures that are stored on Blackboard. I really think you ought to read them. And I don't have lectures to go with them, since I have found that students generally listen to the homework and the test videos. So I try to incorporate a little bit of teaching into these videos, but I really suggest you go ahead and look at the written videos. Also, the text has the same information and with more words, and they do have quite a few examples in the text. In this chapter, we work on some definitions initially, and those are designed experiment versus observational study, and descriptive versus inferential statistics, showing you that not all statistics are the same, and the use of each has advantages and disadvantages. So in this first homework assignment, you're supposed to pick out which ones are a designed experiment, which ones are experimental, could be experimental, and which would just have to be an observational study. Now, in observational study, there's no attempt or there's no ability to control the variables. You simply observe what's going on and take data. The subjects or experimental units are in their natural habitat, either because that's the best place for them or that's what you chose to do. In design experiments, you separate them out and control some variables, some you leave alone. Why would you use one or the other? In some cases, it's a matter of ethics. You can't study the effect of suicide, for example, or murder by saying, okay, these guys are going to get murdered and these people in this group aren't going to get murdered, and we'll see what happens to their local community reaction. Of course, you can't do anything like that, so you just have to gather information and do an observational study. For an experiment, of course, certain things you can take aside and separate out. Some are going to be controlled, in which perhaps there's no treatment given to them. The others might have, say you're doing a drug test, you might give some one level of the medicine, another a different level of the medicine, and another group you give either nothing or a placebo. Placebo is something you're going to read about later in this particular homework assignment. So I think it's pretty easy to sort off which one would be which in this case. The important thing isn't that you're getting these ideas exactly right, but that you're understanding there's two different kinds of studies. Designed experiment, observational, both have advantages and they have disadvantages. Later on we'll look at the descriptive versus the inferential statistics. Let me make another comment on the previous homework problem, and there we're talking about an observation versus an experiment. Anything that's done retroactively is an observation. You can't retroactively go back and control something. And for these observational studies, you cannot determine causation. You can only show correlation, but not causation. That's an important point. So here in this next one, we're talking about the different kinds of variables. Generally, they're associated, or they're separated into two buckets, so to speak. One's qualitative, the other's quantitative. The quantitative ones are further separated into discrete and continuous. A discrete are things that are counted. For example, in this case, the number of kittens in a litter from some cats, that would be discrete. The counting numbers, 10, 8, 5, like that. The continuous ones are those that are measured. The second one, for the amount of ink and pens, well, if you measure the ink, you might have 2 ounces from one, 1.98 from another, 2.02. It's not a counted number, instead it's something measured. But those are both qualitative. Quantitative are things that may have numbers associated with them. They might have numbers, but they aren't measured, they aren't counted. They're just designated. Political affiliation is a designation. That's a qualitative variable. Gender is a qualitative variable. Blood type is qualitative. You're not measuring it, right? And you're not counting it. You might count how many people have it, but blood type itself is just something that's named. So those are qualitative variables. There's other breakdown on the qualitative also, but if you can just separate out qualitative, quantitative, that's good. And then separate quantitative into discrete, which are counted, and continuous, which are measured. Now let's skip down and look at the other type of statistics. Statistics can be divided on how the data is collected, right, and how the experiment is performed. So in this descriptive and inferential, it's sort of an overlap with observational and experimental design. Okay, it's a little bit of an overlap there, but here are these two categories that you need to know as well: descriptive and inferential. Descriptive is taking the numbers, taking the data, collecting that data, then organizing it, studying the numbers, studying the dispersion of the numbers, graphing, that sort of thing. And then inferential is when you have controlled your variables, and now you're looking at your results. You might use techniques from different descriptive statistics, but the inferential can show causation, the descriptive cannot, similar to experiment versus observation. So here we have a retrospective study. Well, you're just gathering the data that somebody else took or that's available. That's descriptive statistics. Same if you're looking at fish runs. But now if you take a group of patients, you separate them out into different categories, you're controlling your variables, and then you're taking data. That's an inferential study, inferential statistics. And of course, it can show causation, whereas the other cannot. If there's any concept I'd like you to get out of this class, if all you get out of this class is the understanding that coincidence is not causality, I will be very happy and your life will be better. Coincidence is not causality. Because two things happen at the same time does not mean one causes the other. And this is used frequently throughout society. It may mean causality, but it doesn't prove it. The classic example is in ancient China, when there was an eclipse, the idea was that perhaps a dragon came across and swallowed the sun or the moon. Fireworks were set off, and when these fireworks were set off, they scared the dragon and it moved away. Well, the coincidence is they fired the fireworks, they set off the fireworks, and the moon or sun returned. Is that causality? No, it's not. But the coincidence was very strong. It worked every single time. So, people like to point this out all the time. Many of the global warming arguments are based on coincidence and assuming causality. So always look at something when somebody gives you data. Is this just coincidence? Can you really assign causality to these variables? The hallmark of statistics is sampling. You obviously, if you could get data from every single person that you were interested in, that's just a matter of compiling a bunch of numbers. But the idea is that you would take a certain group of people, you would interview them, or you would take a certain group of plants and study them, or anything. You're going to isolate of the general population you're trying to study. You're going to isolate certain individuals. That group is going to be called your sample. What you need to have is a representative sample. That means the sample reflects the population. For example, if you had a school and all you looked at were the second graders, that's not representative of your school. You'd have to have some first graders, second graders, third graders, all the way up to every grade that you'd look at if you want that sample to represent the school. And there's various ways to get a sampling technique, samples. One is called random. The idea of random is you're trying to get rid of any bias. Any bias might be, I'm just going to pick these guys that look like they'd be easy to talk to. Random sampling is that you're going to find a random number, and there's ways to find it, and there's two ways to do this. One is you just pick people at random using a random number generator, or, well, drawing names out of a hat is also random. Another is to pick the first one at random and then pick every fifth from then on, or something like that, some fixed interval. Stratified sampling is a division of your population based on the important variable. And depending on the amount, the fraction, the percent that strata is represented in the total population, that percent is also represented in your sample. And there's an example for doing that later on. Cluster sampling is usually done over a large geographic area in which you divide the region up into clusters. Then you look at each cluster, or, well, you select clusters to look at, and then you look through each cluster that you've selected. The reason for this is that, say you want to interview people in a large city, Here's a homework problem on Detroit. If you drew a bunch of names, then the person sampling would have to go from one end of Detroit to the other, picking out this person here, that person there, going down to the south Detroit, going over by, all these suburbs and trying to find these people. That's very inconvenient and very unsuccessful. Or if you divide it into clusters, into groups, then you pick certain clusters and go look through those clusters. That's cluster sampling. Of course, you would like each cluster to represent the whole, or at least have some representation to how the population is divided, and often it's not. There's another kind of sampling, these multi-stage samplings done by large government agencies or these big companies that do polling, where they use several of these techniques. Another one that's also mentioned in this list is convenient sampling. Obviously, this is not going to be very good. Its name even implies it's not. That means you just go and get whoever is convenient for you to sample. Either you have them return self-report, or you go and ask them. For example, you stand at the entrance to a mall and ask people who they're going to vote for. Well, it's convenient for you, but it's generally not representative. So if someone reports data on that, you can say, convenient sampling. I don't know if I believe your results. So from those descriptions, I think you can kind of pick out which ones are which. You see the strata here in D. Residents of a city are grouped by political affiliation. So you have these political affiliations, you group them by that, you find out how much the percent that's Democrat, percent that's Republican, percent that's independent, and then when you take your sampling, you want so many Democrats, so many Republicans, so many independents that reflect the distribution in the general population, in this case a city.